Hey, welcome to the podcast. Okay, so I kind of already introduced you as the CEO of Kudi.com. But yeah, I really want you to like introduce yourself as well. You know, give me a few phrases about you.
Okay.
Like if I asked you at a party and I asked Yinka, how would you introduce yourself? Yeah,
Uh,
go.
okay. Okay. So my name is Yinka. I'm co-founder and CEO at Kudi. What we do is we make basic financial services accessible to millions of Nigerians that are largely within the underbanked or unbanked demography. And how we do that is by building out an agent network, which pretty much is a store that is quite close to where they live or their businesses are. That serves as like a bank branch, so you can go in there to make your payments, withdraw cash, and pay bills. That's what my day job is,
Okay.
and I
Yeah.
watch Netflix
So
at night.
yeah, I watch Netflix too. Well, I'm not as rich as you are, but yeah, that aside. But actually, I brought you here
Right.
today to answer the question of pivoting. Like, basically,
Okay.
because I'm trying to pivot this podcast, and it's like, okay, who can I bring on to actually answer the question of pivoting? Like, the kind of why do you pivot and what do you like how do you go about it and why how do you know when it's right. It's going to be the question is pivot, but it's going to be a lot of sub questions on that.
Okay.
But first of all,
Okay.
what does pivoting even mean within the context of a business? Like, I'm sure when you use the word pivot in just like the normal grammar, it could mean different things, but within the business context, like for example, Kudi as an example. What does pivoting mean in that context?
Okay. So for us, right, one of the key things we say to ourselves, or we said to ourselves in the early days of the company, was that we were building the bank for the future. And uh, and I think pivoting sometimes means you just finding the fastest way to achieve your mission. So for us, it was simple. While we were trying to build the future of banking, as it sounded, we and the way we thought about it, that was, mobile apps, all very digital transactions, end to end, from onboarding to, like, performing your transactions, was going to be digital. But the more we looked at the data, the first thing we realized was, so for example, we had about 10,000 users that signed up on our first iteration, which was a chatbot. um, I think about 30% of them had even performed a transaction with their cards. Uh, Card payments was really, really painful online as of 2017. Um, we were still having as high as 50% success rate on transactions. So on one end, the experience was just really bad for the customers. And there was also like a huge trust problem. People didn't trust online platforms to put in their cards, and you tokenize their cards basically, because for the experience to work, you have to put in your card there. You can't add it every time. And we then realized that if we were going to really build the kind of future that we were talking about, we need to be able to reach the mass market. And even for bulk of the banks, the biggest banks like GT Bank, for example, at the time probably had 5 million customers. Nigeria has a 100 million adults. If you think about it from that standpoint, and even in the 5 million bank customers that GTB has, there's probably just about 30% of those guys that have tried digital channels for their transactions. People just walk into the bank branch. So for us, pivoting to, an agency model was like the first next step, into achieving our mission, which means that let's bring the bank branch closer to the customers, because we were too further along in the future in our first iteration, and we basically just walked a bit backwards, for the lack of a better word.
Yeah, that's interesting because it seems to me that the very idea you had from the beginning, like building a bank of the future, that did not change. Like that didn't change at all. It was just the way you went about it. Like, okay, you realize that we're too far along. Let's bring it back a bit to the reality of things. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, that's
So
correct.
that
Yes.
okay. So that means like so it's just that means pivoting could be just like the model of the business, and also but dating can happen with the idea. For example, if the idea didn't work, could you like still pivot the idea as well?
Yes. So most times I think people, pivot their business for different reasons. The
Mm-hmm.
most that I have seen is a question of sustainability of the business. So if, for example, you're trying to build a business, which means it's beyond just like passion. Um, you have to be able to hire the best people. You have to build the best products, and for you to be able to do things like that, you need resources one way or the other. Sadly, we need money for things. You can either get the money by either raising external funding, or you can generate enough cash flow to fund these things. Um, but the challenge most times is that if the idea itself isn't good enough or isn't sustainable enough, it's tough to get external funding or even generate cash flow. So most times, right, people try to find, maybe like for us, it was like a different iteration of the same idea. But I have seen, companies like I think Slack was once a gaming company, and basically realized that they had these widgets within the game that people were using to. They saw a lot of usage on that, and basically pivoted into a messaging application. So it's possible to see a almost like 360-degree turnaround in like the idea itself. But most times it's because people need to find sustainability, because at some point, even if you're funding this from your pocket, from your income and all of that, to make it like a successful idea, you need to be able to hire more people, and that comes at a cost. Most times people try to find the best ideas that can just bring that kind of cash flow, and allows you keep innovating.
Okay. Even though you did pivot into the agency banking, you still kept the Kudi chatbot. Like that was still there. It wasn't as if like, okay, this is too far into the
uh,
future. We are gonna scrap it. But you left it there, and then it's like, okay, let's see, do something that is like closer to reality. Why still leaving that? Like why? Why didn't you just say, okay,
yes.
you go, let's focus on this because this is sooner.
So, well, it's still there. I still use it for my transactions. A couple of people still use it as well. I think for us, we know that at some point in the future, I would say, very the consumer market, or the consumer payment market in Nigeria or in Africa generally, it's going to move a lot faster than it was in 2017 when we first launched. So it was always important to just leave it there and see what behaviors we get from that. And also because the cost of leaving it there is inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. The last time we wrote any code that touched that product was in 2017. Like, it's basically auto running. There's no engineering resource on it. It's like nothing has changed on that code base since 2017. Nothing, absolutely. So it's like very low cost. The cost of us keeping it alive, and I think it's something that we laugh about, actually, that it just works. Maybe the reason why it works is because there's not enough usage on it and all of that. And so, but I think it's two things. One, the cost of living it, keeping it alive is very minimal, and the second part is just we still want to be able to, like, test that idea again. Maybe sometime this year, sometime next year, and not killing it gives us that mileage. Gives us some mileage when we decide to do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. But that does that mean that you don't even, I mean, you don't put any engineering resource into that? But what about marketing? Do you try to push it as well to make sure people like try to use it? You just like it's on autopilot all around, or just engineering?
The interesting thing is that you can't even find a link to get you there. It doesn't exist, right? But people still find it. You can't find it on our website. You can't find it on any of our pages. Um, Sometimes one of the reasons why we also left it there is so the way our product works largely works on two channels. We have a mobile app and we have a point of sale application. And there are certain scenarios in which the devil just shows up and the mobile app is down or the POS is down, and our customers still need to actually move out their cash. So one of the usage we see is that in days when there's like everywhere is red, because that stuff is always going to be online. We're just going to drop them a link and say, oh, you know what, log in on chat.kudi.ai and then you can move your cash out of our wallet, um, and that helps. So pretty much, yes, we do not invest in marketing. We do not invest in engineering. Nothing. Um, yeah, absolutely not.
Okay. But okay, right now I'm on your website and it says you've got Kudi chatbot, you've got something called savings and dash. Like agency is still like the core part of the product, but you still have these branches of the product. Like they're not. I wouldn't say that like there's some part of financial like it's not so out of what you do, but you also have. Did you pivot into this, or are you just like testing ideas to just see how it works? Same with the chatbot, like the savings, the dash one, dash product. Like, is pivoting the
Okay,
approach
yes.
here, or is just like experimenting on stuff?
So I think that startups are largely made. It's largely a laboratory actually to just experiment stuff. And for us, we're still experimenting, even though we're 4 years in. So we built, I would say, like the core of our business, right, which is stable, growing, generating cash flow. Um, but when we think about the future, right, when we think about how do we move from where we are right now to probably 10x our revenues over the next maybe 2 years or 3 years, we need to be able to find ideas that bring that kind of cash flow. Because of the type of business Quiddy is, largely our success is not determined by, we're not a social media application, right? We're a financial service. So our success is not even determined by the number of employees we have. It's by revenues largely. It's about how much cash you generate. So, and you have to be able to like experiment. And if you're trying to really build a big business that probably potentially could generate $100 million in revenues a year, right? You probably would have like different product lines that basically make up this revenue business. One of the interesting models that I've seen is the way businesses are built in Silicon Valley versus the way businesses are built in Africa and in like emerging markets generally. There's a book I read once that was talking about two types of tree. I think it was sequoia tree, and there's another tree. I think it's Bayesian. I'm not sure whether I got the name right. One is a really long tree. It's very long, and that's how businesses are built in, like Silicon Valley, Europe, and all of that. You basically have one product and you nail it, right? And that product can scale to who knows, $2 billion in revenue. But here, right, you need like you see these Bayesian trees. They are like very short trees, but they make a forest, right? So if you look at the company like InterSwitch is one of the biggest businesses in financial services. They have about 86 products. I know that at least out of those products, there's about 40 of those products that actually generate serious cash, right? So and it's the nature of our market because of our GDP. There's not enough customer base sometimes that can make you the kind of money you want or the kind of success you want. So when you build your product, there's also so much problem. So think about building an e-commerce business in Nigeria. You start with building a merchant business. At some point, you're going to roll out a logistics business. At sometimes you're going to roll out your own payment infrastructure because all of those things just don't work. And then you can build those things so well that at some point you're like, I'm going to commoditize my e-commerce business or my logistics business because we've actually built a really great logistics business. And then you start to serve other customers that are not even buying on your website, right? And then you basically could generate two revenue lines from that: your e-commerce business, your logistics business. At some point, you're going to say, you know what, our my merchants are struggling to finance their inventory, and I'm going to run, a financing product. Then you become a lender, right? You start lending to these guys. Then you've got a lending business. So pretty much in like 10 years, right, you could have like 10 businesses that are probably generating $10 million each in revenues a year. And that's pretty much like the tests you see on our website. Ideas that we're testing out. Some of them are not even on the website. They're all cash generating. Some of them are even profitable on their own end. And then, so once we try some of these experiments, sometimes we lose a lot of money on some of these experiments, to be fair. You try again. Eventually, when you get it right, you then scale it up.
Hmm. It seems to me that like basically maybe because it's emerging market, you basically have to fill the gaps. When you see a gap and no one is filling it, you do it. I mean, I think it's something that is I mean, maybe in Europe because someone else already doing it, you can just like plug into their service. But in Nigeria, most of the time you basically have to build these things and just so it's like pivoting and experimenting and just seeing what works. But you still have the core of like what is driving the business, like the 20% of the business that's bringing like the 80% of the revenue. Like that sounds awesome.
Yes.
Awesome and also like
Yes.
tedious because I don't know. I think okay, basically, I'm trying to think of the cost of pivoting now. Like, I mean, because you had like at least some cash flow to, but before, would you say like someone that doesn't have the cash flow that you do, like wants to pivot, like how can you make that decision rationally, like knowing that you think this other way of doing things could be better, because maybe you saw some data, you think people would like it, but that could also be the cost, the engineering cost of it, the business cost of it. How do you make that kind of decision without basically killing your business?
Okay.
Does that make
So,
sense?
fun. Yes, that makes sense. So, fun fact: 2017, for example, we that was our first year in the business, right? And largely we didn't generate any revenues. It was almost like zero because we didn't have enough transactions. We were even offering some of our services for free, so income was like negative, right? And but towards the end of 2017, we had started to experiment this agent approach. Um, but the challenge was that we were also running out of cash. So I remember vividly that I had emailed all our investors that um, it was obvious that if we keep growing at the rates at which we're growing, there's a word that YC says, "Are you default alive or default dead?" And the whole idea of being default dead is that if investors do not bail you out, and you keep growing at the pace that your business is growing, are you going to break even before you run out of cash? And then we did our model. If we keep growing at the pace that we're growing and our cost stayed constant, we won't break even until we run out of cash. And then you die, literally. So I emailed all our investors and I'm like, we're going to die in like 6 months. It's sure. Like there's no way. Right. But you know what? We're going to try different things. And we experimented shit ton of things. And it wasn't even just the agent business. We tried to build a remittance business between Ghana and Nigeria. We tried to build an online store for merchants to sell. Like all of those things, didn't work out. But the agency one seemed like it was going to work. And I remember that by February 2017, right, 2018, we had come from not generating any cash from the whole of January to probably making about 1 million to 2 million naira a month in revenues. But we then needed cash because we were running out of cash, right? We needed cash to then hire more people. The business also is like working capital heavy, which means that you have to pre-fund the banks to be able to perform transactions here and there. And I emailed all our investors and I was like, oh, it seems like we found something that's going to work. And but hey, we need like $1 million extra. Of course, like no one really took me serious. They're like, yeah, right. That's what you said last time. so so I think, to be honest, there's really, in my experience, there's no one way to do it. What we eventually did was that we basically told our investors, or all the investors that we were talking to at that time, that we had found something that was going to work. But the thing is that they are not going to believe you. So what you need to do is that you need to figure out a way to do it still, but keep them updated. So it's like I send an email to investors December and be like, hey, we lost $1,000 this month in, in payment fees. We didn't make any money. You send another email in January, I'm like, by the way, we made $3,000. You send another email in February and say we made $6,000. You send another email in March, you say you make $15,000. By by I think September or October 2018, we were generating like $100,000 every month in revenues. So of course, like everyone was going to take us seriously, and all the investors that we're talking to at that point were just like, "Oh shit! Like it seems it's working," and they were going to invest. So the I feel like the lesson here for me is we always kept the investors in the loop when it was bad, when it was good. And I think that that's a principle that I have learned, because I think investors hate bad news. So always make sure that they don't want to find out after 6 months. Always make sure that you tell that story ahead. But if you do not have cash at all, like it's difficult, to be honest. You have to still figure out a way to fund those experiments one way or the other, whether you're taking a personal loan, whether you're getting money from friends or early believers or angel investors. So I would probably find angel investors that are willing to take a bet, right? So that I can build out this product and put some cash on marketing and all that. And once it starts to work, I then start to engage, the bigger investors that can then probably put in like some serious check to then get this off the ground.
Okay. So, okay, one last question. Maybe not last, but like once you pivot, I mean, and you think this idea is going to work because you believe it's going to work. Like the first thing you first have is like an idea, or you have this little set of data, you think it could work, and you believe in it strongly, and you go after it. At what point do you decide, okay, maybe this is not it, this is not what we expected? For example, you said you've got all these other channels of experimentation. Like, when do you decide to like take one of your experiments seriously? Like, what data do you look out for? What makes you say, okay, this is it?
Okay, so the first thing is when we have a theory that this is going to probably be big, right? For us, if it's an experiment, the question really is that how much more revenues can we generate from this in a space of 12 months, right? And if there was a theory that, or a principle that this could make at least $1 million in revenues a year, then it's worth pursuing. If it's not going to make $1 million a year, we're not going to do it at all, right? And it's probably because, again, the stage that we are as a business, we wouldn't really like pursue ideas that we think will not be big enough. So once it passes that test of, oh, can you make X amount a year from this? And the way to really do that for us is that we know how much average we probably generate per transaction, and then it's a question of how many transactions can you process a year from this type of product. Once that's there, the next thing is that who is the best person to execute this, right? Who is the best person that can build this idea, or who has done this before? And then we go and look for that talent. It's easy because we have the kind of cash to do that. Most times when you are starting, it's tough to make that kind of decision. So you have to. So in 2017, I used to do this myself. So I would probably move to Kenya or move to Ghana to go and run those experiments myself. And but if you can afford it, I would say find the best person that can do this. And once you find that person, right, the next thing is to set what's like a success metric. If this person, was doing this. So for us, we'll probably create a budget and say, oh, we're going to put X, amount of money in the space of like 6 months to 9 months on this project, and this is what we hope to achieve. And then we're going to track like every month for the next 6 to 9 months. And sometimes by the end of month nine, you actually fail. Like I remember there was a project we ran last year. The budget was about $100,000. By the end of month six, it was a failure. Actually, like all cash gone. And we didn't try to analyze that actually. Why did he fail? Was it because the idea wasn't viable, or was that we didn't run it well? And we realized that the idea was still valuable, but the person that ran it basically didn't run it well. So, and then we started again, right? Then we created another iteration of the idea and found a way to do it a lot cheaper, and found someone else that could do it a lot more efficiently. And right now, it's not even on our website, but it's one of the projects that we're running. And I strongly believe that it's one of the things that's going to take us closer to what our vision is. So I would say that for me, it's jumping in into like that idea, either yourself or finding someone that can best execute it. If you cannot afford to hire someone, definitely you have to do it yourself. So I have founder friends that will move to like Egypt for like 3 months because they think that there's an idea in Egypt that they want to test and their business is going to succeed. I've seen people move to Senegal to go and do stuff, right? And then, but once before you're even going in, you are also trying to say what's like the litmus test. If I get X number of users, if I get X number of interactions, and sometimes you don't even get that. Maybe you only get 50% of that. I don't think it's enough to say it's not working. It's like, why did you then get 50%? Maybe you dropped the ball on a few things. Maybe some assumptions were wrong, and try to tweak again. And sometimes I will have a go at it again. And if it doesn't work, maybe like the second or third time, then I could then say, okay, maybe it's not right for this time, and then keep it, archive it somewhere. And who knows, it might still be valuable or viable in the future.
That's very interesting. Like, this litmus test, making sure to just make sure you're on the right path. And actually, I read somewhere that entrepreneurship is like, is a cheap way for even the government to test what ideas work and doesn't work. And it seems like, pivoting is how even startups try to do that, just to test as quickly as possible because, you don't want to waste money and you don't have like, these limitless resources or the time to figure things out. It has to be, I really like the fact that you said, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, it has to be time bound and budget bound and metrics bound, basically.
Yeah.
That's very enlightening.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on to teach me all this stuff and all the viewers and the listeners all this stuff. Yeah, this has been fun. Thank you so much, and for everyone listening
You're
or
welcome.
watching
Thanks
this.
for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. For everyone listening or watching this, thank you so much for your time. And hopefully, this 2.0 version of the One Question podcast will be better. And to pass the litmus test that Yinka already, highlighted. So, fingers crossed. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Until next time. Bye bye. My name is Busaya Yuwale, and bye bye.